Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. Tom was working on new test data. It was boring and time-consuming, but that was the essence of all the work he and his team had done on the test flight over the past month. So whether you like it or not, he was collating and tabulating information for analysis. His phone chirped a text notification. He saw the screen flash, but didn't pay attention to the sender's name. It took several minutes before he came to a data break and looked up from the monitor. He picked up his phone and looked at the notification. It was a number that was not registered in his contacts, and although the area code was local, he did not recognize this number. For a moment, he was going to delete it as spam, but changed his mind by simply opening it and seeing if it could be from someone on the team whose mobile phone number he hadn't saved yet. He clicked on the text and the message opened on his screen. At first, he was confused. Who could have sent him such an image? He read the text message. "Look carefully, you still have time. Bradley's, 6 p.m. He read it again. He thought for a moment, then chuckled slightly. It's not often you get the wrong number to send love photos, and was about to delete it when he looked at the image again and his heart stopped. At first he didn't notice it. His attention was focused on the liquid, but now he saw it on her left leg, so small that it was immediately unnoticeable. The tiny mole belonged to Tanya, his wife, whom he had been married to for the past 6 years. He reread the message again. Bradley's had a pub where he and Tanya had never been. It was in the next town. But why at Bradley's at 6 p.m.? Tanya was on her way to Boston. Her team was preparing a large offer for a contract. The presentation was scheduled for Monday afternoon. The whole team flew there today, and were going to meet to complete the presentation tomorrow, and finally prepare on Sunday before the performance. Tanya was one of the directors, so of course she was there to prepare. It was 5:15 p.m. She was supposed to land in Boston at 4:30. She usually called when she landed, but it was reasonable to assume that she was busy packing up the team and all their gear and heading to the hotel. He thought about calling, but decided to answer the message first. "Who is this? How did you get this photo? Should I meet you at Bradley's?" He started packing. He decided that he would go to Bradley's. He was going to get an answer one way or another. He wrote to Tanya, "How was the flight? I'm going to have a snack. Call me when you're free." He was going to keep a low profile and try to figure out what was going on. He was walking to his car when his phone chirped again. Tanya, he thought, and opened his phone. The message was a reply from a mysterious caller. "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting there than me." Now his head was spinning. He opened the navigator on his phone and walked briskly to his car. The Bradley was 30 minutes away. It was 5:40. He was supposed to arrive there shortly after 6 p.m. He had no idea how important timing was, so he went straight there and hoped he would make it in time for someone the author of the message thought he would find interesting. On the way, his phone chirped again. This time it was Tanya. "Crazy time with the team. I'll call you later before going to bed. I love you." He didn't think anything about it. Their conversation would be later. He was more interested in the meeting at Bradley's and how the author of the message got to know his wife so well. His heart was beating at a mile per minute when he pulled into the parking lot at 6:12 a.m. The sender of the message did not give him a hint of who he was looking for, so he assumed that whoever wanted to meet him here knew him and would make contact. But what bothered him most was the comment that there was someone more interesting there. The sender of the message obviously knew something he didn't know, and he felt like he was being set up, but he couldn't think of any other way to figure it out. The photograph had thrown his insides into turmoil. He trusted her completely, and their love life was wonderful, or so he thought. He stepped inside and let his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. Not knowing the pub or its location, he stepped aside from the door for a moment and looked around. There was a large hall in front of him and a bar on the left. He went to the bar, found a place near the end, and sat down. The bartender had just finished filling an order for a well-dressed customer and came over to take his order. He asked for the menu and turned to look at the room. His attention was caught by a man who had just received his drink order and was walking across the room to a table full of smiling people. Then he saw what the sender of the text was hinting at. Sitting at a table and accepting a drink from a well-dressed man, Tanya was smiling and dressed to impress in her LBD, little black dress, and pearls. He was operating on autopilot. He got up and walked over to the table where Tanya was sitting. He was 2 steps away from her when she saw him. Her face changed from an open smile to an expression of fear in her wide-open eyes. He didn't slow down for a second. When Tom approached the table, he grabbed the well-dressed man by the hair with his left hand. He yanked sharply, and the well-dressed man dropped his drink and began to fall backwards, losing his balance and screaming in pain. When he was pulling the man, he let go of his left arm and was ready to throw a right cross into his face, but realized that the man's backward movement was too fast, and he was defeated, falling on his ass before Tom could attack him further. He took one step towards him and recognized him. "Don't get up, Pete," Tom said. "I'm serious." Pete looked up from his drink-soaked suit, lying in a crumpled heap at Tom's feet. He nodded, not moving or saying a word. Tom looked back at Tanya. The entire table fell silent. He recognized several people who were there. All of them were part of Tony's team and had been to his house for picnics and gatherings. "I think loyalty to the team is turning into infidelity," he thought. Except for one person. Someone sitting in front of him at this moment was someone who knew the truth and decided to tell him. He thought about finding out who it was, but only for a moment, and then decided it wasn't worth continuing. "I'm going home. If you're waiting for any chance to save our marriage, you're coming home right now." She nodded and started to get up, but he raised his hand. "You'd better give me a minute to leave." Before turning to leave, he looked at Betty Wilson and Bob Thornton sitting next to her. "Betty, does Bill think you're in Boston too?" "Bob, is that what Alice thinks?" They were looking down. They couldn't meet his gaze, let alone answer his question. "Is the whole team making love?" he thought. Unfortunately, he knew that at least one of them was for sure. The trip home was automatic. He seemed surprised to find himself in his driveway before he even realized it. He came in, took a beer from the fridge, and sat down in the living room. He knew Bill Wilson and Alice Thornton. He didn't recognize the other two couples. In general, there were 4 pairs. He was debating whether to call Bob or Alice. He realized that he didn't want to talk and didn't know much, but at the same time, Betty and Bob were there having fun. He decided to write them a message. He sent them both a short message. "I just heard from Tony that business trip plans seem to have changed. It's best to call to find out the latest news." Well, now they know that something happened, and they can decide whether to investigate it further or not. At least his conscience was clear. About 20 minutes later, he heard the garage door open, and Tanya drove into the garage. He was waiting in the living room. She came in still wearing her LBD, but the Come Use Me pumps and jewelry were gone. She seemed calm as she entered the living room and sat down opposite him on the sofa. He was silent and waited for her to start. He knew that silence was a powerful tool in any discussion. He was determined to let the silence continue for as long as it took. It didn't take long. Tanya seemed ready to explode. "It's not what you think," she began. He raised his hand for silence. "You have absolutely no idea what I think about what I saw tonight," Tom replied. "I don't need a big backstory. We are both engineers, and I think you know as well as I do that there is no real or objective answer to any question why. Inevitably, this is just a justification for mitigating bad results, so I'm not even going to ask why. Let's start with something simpler. How long? How many are there? How often? Do our friends know besides the other scammers at the table? Am I known as your cuckold among your work colleagues and our friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that at all," Tanya said. "We, the team, our travel plans were disrupted, and instead of returning home and starting over tomorrow, Pete suggested that we just stay in town and rest for a day before we start." "I didn't see the whole team there. Where were all the others?" Tom asked. "When we received the news, some of the team decided to stay at home for one more night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you decided to lie to me," he replied. "You looked pretty close to Pete. Is there anything going on between you that you would like to tell me about?" "Well, for starters, Pete's fine, and he's convinced Bradley's owners not to press charges," she said in a confident tone. His eyes widened in utter amazement at her sense of devotion to Pete. "I don't care about your boyfriend. If that dumbass hadn't tripped on his own feet, I would have broken his nose. By the way, the jury still hasn't come to that conclusion," Tom said. "Let him press charges. I've spent the night in jail before. It doesn't scare me." "Do you love him?" Tanya was silent for a moment. He could tell she was gathering her thoughts. Yes, silence was indeed a powerful tool, and his mind was working overtime to fill the space left by her silence in conversation. Again, it didn't look like it was going to end well. "He's not my boyfriend. Absolutely nothing is happening. Yes, I should have told you about the trip plans, but it seemed so trivial. Whether I was in the city or in Boston, it didn't matter. You weren't expecting me, and I was still with my team. All we did was eat before heading to our rooms. You had no reason to act the way you did. He was just bringing drinks. You completely disgraced me in front of my team. She was now completely in attack mode, testing if she could bluff and bully to clear her way. He opened his phone, found a photo, and pushed the phone across the coffee table to her. He could tell by the look on her face that she remembered the photo and the circumstances and knew it couldn't be denied. She started again, this time slowing down. He grabbed the phone from the table, discreetly launched the voice recording app, and put the phone in his shirt pocket. Tom, our team, she searched for the word, is very united in many ways. Most of us, she began, we have a small group that meets regularly. Bradley had them all. We were the main forces carrying the bulk of the ideas for this proposal. You know how much time I've spent trying to get our team together. I do not know how it really started. It was some time after Pete took over as head. We worked closely together and he attracted me and it just happened. Tanya said. He answered her. Falling in love does not happen just like that. There are a lot of conscious decisions that are made. We both know that, so don't insult me, please. So, almost 6 months. He answered one of his questions. That's when Pete signed the contract, right? She nodded. The team. He began again. All of you? He dismissed the thought without giving it a name. I mean, all of you together? She nodded again. Pete said it's good for building trust and team dynamics. Is that what he said to convince you all to form a fucking team? Now you're being rude. It's much more than just that. I feel such a connection with Pete and my team, much more than ever before. Tony's bravado showed itself again. He had a bad feeling that nothing good would come of it. Unfortunately, I have to say that you may see some personnel changes in your team, Tom said. What did you do? Tanya gasped. Tom, if you tell anyone else, you'll just destroy even more lives. Leave it to them to make their own decisions. We have to come to our agreement without them. Tanya, you should know that I cannot be a silent accomplice. I like Bob and Alice. In fact, I like them a lot more than Betty and Bill do right now. He added. I texted them that the travel plans seem to have changed. How your love buddies respond to their spouses and how their spouses accept these answers is entirely up to them. I can sleep with my decision. Tom, we have the most productive team in the history of Cramerica Inc. She was almost yelling at me. And you benefited too, mister. Just because we had our team planning meetings on Wednesdays didn't mean you were missing anything. I never interrupted you. Yes, I used my team a little earlier in the day, but you never knew about it. That photo you showed me, do you want to know about this photo? Now she was mocking me. It was right after Pete shot his charge at me. That's right. Pete filled your loving wife with his beautiful liquid. What you don't see is Betty. My jaw dropped as I listened to the extent of the deception and the depths of my ignorance. So now, just because you know, just because your poor ego is hurt, you want to ruin everything that my team and I have achieved? Tanya hissed. She was getting more and more angry. It was contagious. Tom felt his heartbeat quicken as Tanya continued to defend her fucking team, and he got even angrier too. For a moment, just for a moment, as he drove home from Bradley's, he thought that if it had only been once with Pete, maybe he could have forgiven it. This thought died a long time ago, a bloody but quick death. He didn't need to hear anything anymore. He didn't want to hear anymore, but she continued. No, sir, we're not going to let you break everything. You're going to text Bob and Alice and tell them that you've heard from me and we're stuck in Atlanta. But we've booked a flight for the morning. This is a story that Betty and Bill are going to use and you're going to support them, so help me. Stop it, she screamed. The price of this deal is tens of millions, and your hurt feelings don't mean shit. Send a message and we can talk about how we can move forward. Move on, Tom shouted. There is no way to deal with this in the future. You're leaving. Right now. You, your sick team, and your bastard Pete can go on as you want. We're done. I'll find a lawyer this week and get him to work. It's a simple 50-50 split. You keep your pension, I'll keep mine, Tom said. Go away. Your nasty office has a reservation in the city. Use it. Go to Boston and win another amazing victory for yourself and your team. Tom, please send these messages, Tanya said in a much softer tone, pleading with me. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I, we could lose tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of commissions and bonuses. Just think of all the places we could go with that money. Please, Tom, Don't let some unjustified worry about some random love confuse us. Pete says I'm on a fast track to executive status. All I have to do is keep acting like we're doing now for a few more years. Don't you want this for me? For you? What is it? She asked. Tanya, just go away. He had just said that when he was hit hard in the back, and the breath was knocked out of him as he continued to fall to the floor with a knee in his back. Don't hurt him, Tanya screamed. Too much, she added sarcastically. So the jury still hasn't decided to break my nose, has it? Pete asked, bending down and bringing his face close to mine as I lay pinned to the floor. Tony must have had a transmitter, Tom thought. Now I know whose team she's playing for. We'll see who gets their nose broken. Pete smiled. Take his fucking phone and type fucking messages for him. We don't have time for this shit. Someone yanked him off the floor. It was someone else. Tom deliberately acted out a semi-conscious state, forcing the guy behind him to put a lot of effort into lifting him to his feet. This gave him some necessary information. His captor was a weak office bastard and wheezed from the effort to get Tom to his feet. Tom was recovering his breath after he was hit and returning to the game. Unlike Pete and his team of well-groomed salesmen, Tom's team worked in the field at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Oh, his group of engineers wasn't close to their league, but while spending time with the crews during test assignments, the team was invited to work on their biceps at Pillsbury under the guidance of some hard-working instructors who flew missions in an airplane that his team modified specifically for them. If these people showed up on your doorstep, it was only because they were sent there and your days on Earth were coming to an end. Tom and his team have created the gadgets they need to get into some hot spots and, more importantly, get out of them. Tom's team was proud that their developments helped fulfill the mission and bring everyone home. The guys and their scary passengers were very grateful for the hard work Tom's team did to make sure their gear worked, and the scariest guy in the group was MSGT Troy Baker. MSGT was well known to those who lived in his world. Everyone, from recruits to colonels, showed him the respect he earned by guiding his men through missions around the world. He was well known for never leaving anyone behind enemy lines. This reputation was cemented forever during the mission in Colombia. Sergeant Baker told the young platoon commander, a lieutenant, to stay close. This was the first LTS mission, and MSGT Baker thought he was doing well for a beginner when the enemy ambushed their group. They were able to fight back, but then he looked back and saw the lieutenant on the ground bleeding from a head wound. The medic jumped up and said he was checking vital signs. Baker knelt down, grabbed the medic by the arm, and said, "His salvation is a priority." The medic replied, "He's not a tenant." "It could be," he agreed, "but he's coming home with us anyway." The medic looked at him as if he had just lost his mind. They'd be lucky to get back with their asses, but carrying a dead guy, what was he thinking? MSGT read his mind. "I'd do the same for you, Billy," he told the doctor. "Stay close in case I need you." What happened was a legend. When they returned to the base, Doc met them as the helicopter was landing. The medic explained to the doctor that the lieutenant had forced him. The doctor nodded his head and pulled a penlight out of his pocket. The medic watched in amazement as the lieutenant's dead pupils narrowed in the harsh beam of light from the pen. "Would you like to reconsider your diagnosis, doctor?" Doc asked the medic when they sent the lieutenant to the operating room. He was one of those guys who had no age. He never talked much, but when he talked, everyone listened. He was a throwback. It was handmade and unique and seemed to give a special shine to Tom and his team. During the many long hours of downtime between missions, MSGT showed his appreciation by teaching Tom and the team some basic but effective defense and hand-to-hand combat techniques. He told the engineers that it was better to know something just in case. "I know that the biggest threat you're likely to face is a stuck copier or a nasty paper cut. But if you stay in this business, you'll find yourself traveling to some dangerous places. So now, if you are lucky enough to meet one of the local colorful aborigines, you will have something useful to rely on. MSGT Baker is finished. But let's hope that a paper cut is the scariest thing you've ever had to deal with." Tom allowed his breathing to recover, pulled himself together, and allowed himself to lean back against his opponent, letting him think he was holding Tom down. He recalled the fighting techniques that MSGT had shown them. "You may be in a position where you have little choice but to take a beating. It sucks, but it happens. The trick is to remember that even when you get hit, you can still fight back. You just have to be smarter than the asshole who hits you." Tom remembered the lesson and leaned back against his opponent, passively resisting and draining his strength. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete said, looking into his eyes. Tom held his tongue while Pete took great pleasure in humiliating him and forcing him to follow his orders. "Where's the phone, Tom?" he asked, and then saw the outline of the phone in his shirt pocket. Ah, there he is. He reached for it with his right hand. Tom stepped back hard, hitting the guy who was holding him on the shin with his right heel, then stepping on his toes covered in Gucci loafers. He bent his arms and broke free from the grip of his opponent, who screamed in pain and fell on his leg, which could no longer support his weight. He saw Pete's eyes widen in understanding. His right arm extended forward, and he turned his shoulder as MSGT showed him, slamming his twisted fist into the center of Pete's face with maximum force. He felt a bone break under his fist, and a real fountain of blood gushed out of Pete's nose as he collapsed to the floor as if he had been hit with an axe. He turned around to see who was holding him. It was Bill. He was lying on the floor and crying, holding his leg. "I think you broke my leg," he whined. Tom stomped hard on his leg at the fracture site, and Bill screamed in pain. "This should eliminate all your doubts, you fool," Tom shouted. He turned around and saw Pete on the floor, pressing both hands to his face and trying to get to his knees. He walked up to him and bent his face to his ear. "Looks like Pete broke your nose, old boy." "I just don't want to stop there," he said, and punched him hard in the temple. Pete went out like a light. His adrenaline spiked and his breathing became ragged as he looked around the living room for Tony. At that moment, he felt a strong blow to the middle of his back and the base of his neck. He dropped to one knee and turned around to meet the new attack. He looked up and saw Tanya with a cast-iron frying pan in her hand. She missed and only slid over Tom. He got to his feet and roughly tore the pan out of her hands. "Tom, we can still make this work," she said. "Think about the money you're throwing away. I will stop all this love. I'll cut them off, I promise. Just you and me, just like in the good old days, Tom." He massaged the back of his head with his left hand and looked at her, stunned by how quickly she turned from one Tony to another. He thought for a second about the alien in John Carpenter's The Thing, how she changed shape with each new challenge. He smiled at the thought. Tanya took this smile for tacit agreement with her last request and moved to hug Tom. He lowered his left hand from his neck to hold her down. Then, after thinking for a millisecond, he raised his right hand and hit her right in the nose. Not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough to break a bone. Tanya screamed and collapsed on the floor. "It hurts like hell, doesn't it?" "My eyes are all in tears. I can't see anything, I can't breathe. Everything is covered in blood." "It works every time." "Why did you hit me?" She couldn't stop crying. "Because you're scum, and I could," was his reply. His phone was still on and recording. Not all of this was in his favor, but he felt that he had enough reasons to justify his actions. He quickly looked around the room and remembered what MSGT had told him. "Decide when you can act and don't move until it's right. But once you do whatever you can and don't stop until no one else can move but you." He looked around. Apart from Bill whimpering in the corner and Tony trying to stop the blood flowing from her nose, he was the only one who moved. "It doesn't look like you, lover boy, and Mr. Bill will be able to perform on Monday." "And who's going to get all these millions and big bonuses now?" Tom continued. "Well, I wonder what Art will say when he finds out." He was going to call 911, but waited, knowing that as soon as the police showed up, he would lose the chance to question Tanya, and walked over to where she was sitting. She was holding a dish towel to her face. Tom sat down next to her. "Pinch the bridge of your nose with your thumb and forefinger. Like that." He showed her what to do. The adrenaline rush subsided, and he suddenly lost all his energy and sat down heavily in front of Tony. Where did his wife go? The Tanya he had known for so many years was not the woman opposite him, and he wondered again how she had deceived him so thoroughly for so long. "Was it worth it?" he asked. Tanya looked at him and shook her head. "It might work," she said, "if you just come with us. We were so close. After Monday, I would have been on my way to the executive suite. It will throw me back. I can fix it, but it will set me back." "So that was all you wanted, to become vice president?" Tom asked. "What about us? Deception, lies, will it just go on?" "Tom, you're so naive. Pete knew that. He told me that your black and white ethics and Boy Scout views would hold me back if I let them. He told me that I had to break out of your control and be an independent woman if I wanted to succeed." "Did he tell you that before or after he made you a compilation for the team?" Tom asked. As if you don't know how it happens, she spat out. Oh, I tried to be a good girl and do all the things that you said would advance my career. Do you want to know what really works? Tom was silent. When someone decides to blow themselves up, sometimes you just need to get out of the way. He was still recording. Well, I'll tell you, my loving husband, all those things that you told me didn't work. I worked my ass off making sure that all my assignments were completed on time and according to budget, and all I got was a few compliments. It wasn't until Betty took me aside that I learned what a woman really needs to do to get ahead. Trust me, making your way to the top works. It's much easier and much more fun. So this was going on even before Pete showed up? Asked Tom. Oh, for a smart engineer, you can be awfully slow sometimes, Tom, she said. Wait, are you also making love to the boss? Art? Art Vandalai? Tom asked incredulously. Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, any member of the team who could help me in my career. She continued. Even now when you think you've got it all figured out, we told Art where we were going when we set off. He's gathering the rest of the team right now. They will be given a legend about our absence. They will have to perform without us, but I think the extra effort we put into their purchasing manager will pay off. I really want to hear this, he thought. Oh, damn it, why not? Extra effort? Tom prompted. You've always been a breadwinner, Tanya. In fact, it was so easy that I even hate to call it an effort. She laughed. As there's an old joke, the worst love I've ever had was great. She continued. It was so easy with men at the bidders conference that we had to be a little more creative with Brenda, the leading woman on the selection committee. It's funny, I can even seduce a woman, but I had to throw old Pete in there as a striker. She was very curious. And with promises of more when we started working together after the contract was signed, yes, we have a selection committee in our pocket. Then why all this? I mean, if everything is blurred, why do these things with attacking me? Tom asked. It was Pete's idea. Dumbass. I told him to cool off, that I'd come home, suck your dick, and be back just in time to catch the flight, but he had to act like an alpha. Look where this has led us. You wouldn't buy me that cheap, he said. Maybe not, Tanya replied, but I would have flown anyway. Well, you're definitely not going on this flight now, he said. Remembering how Pete seemed so knowledgeable, he decided that Tony should have a transmitter with him. Art, are you listening? I'm going to call the police. I'm sure there are a lot of criminal offenses involved, and we haven't even started following the trail of your fraud yet. This is a federal contract, isn't it, Tanya? Tom asked rhetorically. The feds will definitely not like, as you put it, your extra efforts. I'm sure you have great lawyers and all that, but maybe there's an alternative. He let it hang. A moment later, the tune Welcome the Chief started playing on Tony's cell phone. Art? She asked into the phone. Sure, I'll put you on speaker. Tom? Art's voice came from the speaker. First, let me apologize to you. Pete's actions were a gross error of judgment. I can assure you that the board will act decisively with him. Thank you, Art. It's a load off my head. I'm glad to see that you and the board take attacks and fraud so seriously. Tom, these are all very unfortunate accusations. Lawyers will get rich, but no one really wants to rock the boat. We can pay the fine, Pete and Bill will get some community service, but in the end, you'll be divorced and twice as poor. Art explained it in a businesslike way. Do I hear a sentence, Art? Asked Tom. Tanya always said that you are the smarter of the two of you. Still, I'm happy that I hired Tanya. Yes, Tom, there is definitely an offer there, Art continued. Tom, we replaced you in your relationship with your wife, and when you found out about it, you were treated in the most disgusting way. Well, considering all this not my blood on the floor, it was probably a weak and not very successful attempt after all. Tom intervened. Tom, Art continued, instead of calling the police like you want, let's say we could come to an agreement instead. I just sent a picture to Tony's phone, well, not me, but one of my techies here. They tell me that it will disappear after viewing. Take a look at this. Perhaps this could restore some goodwill. Tanya turned the phone to Tom. He saw the inscription Grand Cayman Bank and a very large number. And when will it be deposited? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You have an email with your account number. It's been a very bad day for you, Tom. This may be a difficult decision for you, and I don't discount emotions. Tanya is a very desirable woman. Anyway, however, you can't put emotions in the bank, can you? You can't, Tom agreed, parodying Art's manner of speech. Cramerica Inc. will cover the costs of your divorce. You will never be able to reconcile, I think we all admit it. Tanya will sign the documents. She will only ask for her personal belongings and a pension. He thought for a moment before answering. On the one hand, he could be principled, expose this whole dirty mess and let the chips fall. On the other hand, he could have just walked away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to do just that. Does Cramerica Inc. have medical staff, Art? Asked Tom. Yes, Tom, I believe we have several doctors on the payroll, Art replied. All right, Tom said. You'd better load some of them into a limo and send them here to pick up your team. So you agree? Art asked. Tom replied, That's right. Are we done, Tom? Art asked. Goodbye, Art, Tom said, and hung up. Tom took out his phone, turned off the recording app, and put it back in his pocket. I knew you'd see it our way, Tom. We can still be friends with benefits when this is all over. Tanya put on what she thought was her most charming smile, but even her dazzling smile couldn't reverse the effects of a ruined nose. Her eyes were blackened, blood caked under her nose and dripped down her chin in dried drops. Tom found this sight comical and he allowed himself to smile. Once again, Tanya misinterpreted his smile as agreement and bent down to kiss him. Tom held out his right hand to stop her. He cupped her face in his palm and pushed her back until she fell onto the couch with a thud. Either I hit you too hard or I didn't hit you hard enough. In which world would I like to kiss you, Tanya? Or should I say, a cheater? She looked at him resentfully. Take whatever you want and get out of here, Tom said and headed for the door. He stopped next to Bill. Does your leg still hurt? He asked. God, you fool, it still hurts, Bill whined. Maybe it'll take your mind off the pain in your leg, Tom said and kicked Bill twice. Bill curled up and groaned. He walked over to Pete, who managed to sit down. Pete raised his hands in a helpless attempt to shield himself from Tom. Please don't hit me anymore, Tom. I'm not going to hit you, Pete, Tom said, and Pete smiled triumphantly. It was so easy with this nerd. His smile disappeared the moment Tom's foot stepped on and rubbed the cloth covering Pete's testicles several times. He screamed and lost consciousness. Spitting in the face of his future ex-wife, Tom left the house. He got into his car, not knowing where he was going to go, but he needed food and shelter first of all. He took a hamburger from a takeaway, checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, near the freeway, and fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. He woke up early the next morning and dragged his aching body out of bed. He was making coffee in the motel room when his phone picked up a message and he reached for it. It was a message from a number he already knew and he immediately opened it. I'm sorry about yesterday. I can meet you. At the mall. Noon. I'll wave at you. I'll be there. He texted back and poured lukewarm brown water from the coffee maker into a paper cup. Yes, I'll be there, he thought, and turned on his laptop. Time for online banking. In college, long before he met Tanya, Tom had a divorced economics professor who always advocated having at least one offshore account for a rainy day fund. He was interested in this, and with the help of his professor, he soon became the owner of a brand new bank account in the Cayman Islands. It was his Fuck You Foundation. He started this account 10 years ago and replenished it whenever he could. He was proud that he had about $50,000 in his account. Well, his fund, Fuck You, Tanya, was going to receive a serious replenishment. Tom opened a secure website for each bank. Using his password and a few keystrokes, he transferred the bulk of the Cramerica Inc. payment to his personal account. He left $100,000 in the original account. He took a shower, changed his clothes, and prepared to go to meet the mysterious sender of the messages. Tom entered the mall just after noon. When he entered, he saw a man wave at him. He looked about Tom's age, handsome and well-dressed. Tom walked over to him. I think you sent me the message, Tom said, sitting down. I'm sorry about how things turned out. I do not know if there was any easy way to tell you this, the stranger began. Why don't you start with who you are and your connection to Tanya, Tom asked. I was on the team. I left the army after 8 years of service. I was wounded in battle, recovered for a long time, and was discharged for medical reasons. I joined Cramerica Inc. about 6 months ago. I was assigned to Pete's team about 3 months ago. I was telling a friend about this job and mentioned that I work for Tanya. When he asked for her full name, we discovered that we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to look after Tanya as a favor. Everything was great at first. I was warmly welcomed into the team. It didn't take me long to figure out why. He shuddered. Tanya came to me about 2 months later. She's extremely attractive and, irresistible, but when I asked her about her ring, she just smiled and told me that you were fine with it. I wasn't interested and told her so. This marked the beginning of a deep freeze. After I turned her down, I got all the crappy assignments and nothing but reprimands from Pete. I called our mutual friend back and told him that Tanya had contacted me. He told me about you and that, in his opinion, pimping your wife for a fee seemed out of character for a man he knew. He thought there was more to it than Tanya had said, and that you needed to know. Pete sent me a picture when they were trying to get me on board with the crew, a kind of prize that I could have counted on if I had agreed. Let's just say that I disagree with their methods. I think I'm a straight arrow. I resigned yesterday and sent you a message. Who is our mutual friend? Tom asked. Troy Baker. If I hadn't met Troy, he replied, then paused for a moment before continuing. Let's just say that he helped me get out of trouble when I was a green lieutenant. I owe him a favor or two. We both owe him, Tom agreed. What are you going to do? The stranger asked. Art sort of settled it all for me. I could have brought in the cops, and yes, Bill and Pete and even Tony would have had some legal problems. But with his lawyers, it would all have ended up like a pothole in the road. We made a deal. You might think I'm selling out, and maybe in a way you're right. But they stole the only thing I had that was irreplaceable. If I can't make them pay legally, well, at least I can make them pay. It won't bring Tanya back, but I think I may find that she's less indispensable than I thought. I have a trip planned. Tell Troy thank you for everything. I'm not going back to work. What about you? Tom finally asked. Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Inc. Now that you're gone, they might need another engineer. I think you'll find that they do business a little differently in Baxter. Maybe you'll like it better there. It's a difficult task, but the additional benefits don't compare to what Tony's team offered. The stranger smiled. I think I can put up with it. The stranger stood up. Tom did the same. They just nodded to each other and left without saying another word. Tom had just checked in for a flight to Costa Rica on Monday. Tamarindo would be a good place to relax for a while, he thought. He was heading towards the guards and saw a mailbox ahead. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope addressed to the Department of Justice, Washington, D.C. There was a recording flash drive inside. They may be interested. Who knows? He thought about it. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't as good as Art thinks they are. He dropped the envelope into a drawer and walked over to the security line. The epilogue is 9 months later. Tom was sitting at his usual table in the cafe. Anna, charming as always, brought him his favorite cocktail. Thank you, dear, he said, and raised the glass to his lips. He got the mail. He was still holding the envelope in his hand. There is no return address. He wondered who had found him. He wasn't going to take any difficult steps to stay hidden, but in order to find him in a small town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica, it would take some resources unavailable to an ordinary guy. His first thought was that Art's men had found him. He left the letter at his home for 2 days. He was pretty sure it wasn't a bomb, but you can't be too careful. Carlos, Tom called out to the cafe owner. ¿Tienes tus cuchillo? Sí, Señor Tom. Tom handed over the envelope and took a few steps back. You can never be too careful, he thought as Carlos opened the envelope. He handed it to the one who thanked him. He took another sip from his glass and turned the envelope over. Several sheets of paper fell onto the table. He took the note. I thought you might find this interesting. That was all the note said, and instead of a signature, there was a phone number. Troy has the resources to find me, he thought. I can live with that. He turned over another piece of paper. It was a copy of a newspaper article with a photo. The photo showed Pete, Bill, Tanya, and Betty being led out of the Cromerica Inc. building in handcuffs. The headline of the article read, 4 accused of multi-million-dollar procurement fraud arrested. He smiled. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't what he thought they were, he told himself aloud, a habit he'd picked up since his Spanish was weak and there was no one to speak English to. He liked listening to English even if he was talking to himself. Anna. He raised his empty glass. See, Mr. Tom. Thank you, Anna, he said, taking his cocktail, taking a sip, and looking peacefully at the dark blue Pacific Ocean. Which Tanya?